Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for coming through. We have a few more minutes before we need to start, about 3 more minutes. So I'm going to mute myself and turn off the camera. And I'll see you in about 2. Good morning, comrades. Welcome. Welcome. To Real Reforms webinar. We've got about a minute before we need to kick off. If your bandwidth allows, please do switch on your camera so we can see people's faces and be together in the space. I wish I could see you actually. Hi, Sophia.
Good morning. Good morning,
morning. Wonderful, wonderful. Tebo, I just want to see if both Daniels are online. Do you mind just checking for me? I can't see participants.
I was just chatting to them offline, so they will be joining.
Okay.
They are here.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. Hi, everybody. I mean, we've been going through so much as a country in the last few days. Welcome to Real Reform for ECD's webinar on the 2025 budget. If folks could mute themselves, if they aren't talking, or if there's somebody on my team with muting powers, I'd appreciate that. Who is this? Team Bata. Thank you so much. My name is Hopolang Selebalo. I am the chair of Real Reform for ECD. I am also the head of policy and research at Smart Start. I'll be joined by my colleagues Tebo, Daniel, and Daniel. One Daniel from Ilifala Bantwana, one Daniel from Equal Education Law Center in this discussion. We'll be providing you with a quick overview of the developments that took place or did not take place last week when the budget was meant to be tabled. It feels so very long ago, but I'm like, literally, it was a week ago around a week ago. And from the budget documents that we managed to get, and I think many folks on this call managed to get via news outlets and the like, we saw that a significant boost had been promised to the ECD sector in the form of 10 billion rand to increase the ECD subsidy, amongst others. And now with this pause, there is real precarity to that. And we need to agitate deeply, advocate deeply to ensure that our sector doesn't lose that money, that practitioners don't lose that money, that children don't lose that money. So again, just to say thank you for making it here today. In terms of the sequence of events in today's discussion, there we go. It's the welcome from me. We'll have Daniel breaking down the 2025 budget and what it means for ECD. We'll have our lovely other Daniel speaking to ECD and public finance and chatting about how government can sustainably fund ECD. And then Tepo will take over in terms of how we collectively advocate and keep the pressure on government to fund the sector. And then I will moderate the discussion following the presentations. And then we can close. I just want to again check because I can't see. We've got both folks online. Netepo, just a thumbs up, and then I can.
Unfortunately, not. Daniel or Ilifa has not been able to join yet. I don't know if Dan from ELC is here. But both,
I'm here.
I don't see them on. Oh, you are here. Daniel is having a bit of challenges accessing the link, so I'm just trying to help him. Colleagues, could you just please give us a grace of 2 minutes while I sort this on the side?
Cool. Tepo, would you like Dan to start while he's here, or should we?
I think let's keep the order because it flows quite well from one to the other.
All right, cool. Let me stop sharing screen so I can see people's beautiful faces. Those with their cameras on. 59 folks. Let us take 2 minutes. So sorry about that. And we'll be right back.
In the meantime, could you just please ask colleagues to, in the comments, in the chat, introduce yourself, tell us where you are joining us from and which organization you're representing, so that we can have a little register going to know the attendance. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tepo. All the names are popping up into the chat now. Sophie, Christina, Liz, Juliana, Laura. Great to have you guys here today. All right. Deepo, Mario, Andy. Thanks so much for coming through. Just a few more minutes, Conrad.
He's still having some challenges. I think I will take over and present the parts that Daniel is going to present on. I'm pulling up the presentation he was going to be working off of.
All right, thanks, Tepo. Much appreciated.
I've just sent you that presentation. Hopes, please, could you please project that one?
Will do, Kata. Will do. 1 second. We really appreciate the grace, everybody. I will share the agenda for today, Elroy. We are just going to try and pull up the slides that we'd prepared for this presentation. I'll share that agenda just now.
Okay, I think we're in the clear. The thing about technology is that it sort of feels when you are trying to work fast and it slows down a little bit extra. but it should be popping up on the screen shortly.
Okay, you've got it?
Yes.
Amazing. Cool. In the meantime, I'm going to share the agenda in the chat. Wonderful. Nothing on the screen yet. I think
It seems like it's frozen on my side. Please request that access. Perhaps Daniel can let you in, Hopelang.
sure, it's been requested. Let me just give him a call.
Therefore, let us know if anyone from Alifa can help, if it's a permission thing, if you want to forward it to one of us. Oh.
Thank you. Oh, Daniel is here.
Dan is here. Stealthy. Let's
Daniel,
go.
are you here?
I am sorry about that, everyone. I've shifted to a router and I'm now fine. There was no indication the whole morning that the internet was an issue, but only when this meeting started. Sorry about that.
No worries. Everybody's been really gracious. Sorry for the tech issues. Everybody, sorry, Dan. Thanks, Tepo, for holding the fort there. And let's kick off. Dan, I've introduced, and I think we're all ready for you.
Okay, great. Sorry again, everyone, and good morning. My name is Daniel McLaren, Public Finance Economist from Alifa Laventuana. Let me get straight into the presentation, which is looking at just trying to put into context this extraordinary February 19 budget, which, as I'm sure you've all heard, included an historic allocation to early childhood development, as well as some other developments such as the VAT increase, which we are obviously less keen to welcome. So I just want to try and put that into context and just explain what is at stake. So just to put the budget itself into context, the February 19 budget was a presentation of the national budget, and therefore the national budget for the Department of Basic Education and the conditional grant for early childhood development, which funds a large part of the early learning budget, is announced, whereas the provincial budgets are then provincial budget speeches are provided 2 weeks later, and those then confirm exactly what the provincial contributions are to total expenditure. And even though we are in uncharted waters around the budget process, there are provisions in our public finance legislation which allows for departments to continue spending their existing budgets up to 50% of the previous budget, whilst the details of the following year's budget are ironed out. So we do need, obviously, direction from our politicians and a way forward, but we aren't sort of facing an immediate spending crisis in the budget. There's obviously the various components to the early learning budget, and the ones which I'm going to speak about and which were most impacted by the announcements on February the 19th in the budget, which is obviously now withdrawn and has no effect, but it's important for us to know what was in there. Just to clarify that we are speaking here about pre-grade R early learning funding, and the parts of the budget which we were given information on February the 19th and where there were new allocations made were the per capita ECD subsidy, the infrastructure and registration support for early learning programs, the early nutrition pilot, which the DBE is running, and the eCares information management system. So where were we, or where are we now before the March 12th budget? So we have been seeing some increases to early learning spending over the last few years, and in particular since the function shift to the Department of Basic Education. And these, of course, are welcome in a general climate of fiscal consolidation or austerity. However, they have been kind of limited, and they're certainly not sufficient to get us where we need to be in terms of massively improving the quality of early learning that's available in the country, as well as access to early learning programs. And you can also see that at the provincial level, funding has been very constrained. It's kind of been flat since 2023-24, and increases to early learning funding have been driven by the nationally determined conditional grant for early childhood development, which is then distributed to provincial education departments, and together with the equitable share funds the total subsidy budget. So the total budget has been growing, but not at a rate to reach universal access, and therefore the number of children accessing subsidized early learning programs has been increasing gradually, but again, not at the rate which is necessary to get us anywhere near on track towards universal access. And if you look at the DBE's 2030 strategy for ECD programs, the kind of milestones on the way to universal access are 1.5 million children accessing subsidized early learning by 2027-28, and 2.3 million children accessing subsidized early learning by 2030. At the same time as the budget was increasing steadily, but not far enough, the actual value of the subsidy was frozen. And so this meant that while access was slowly increasing, the quality and the kind of early learning experience that practitioners are able to offer in low-income settings is extremely constrained. And we can compare the value of the ECD subsidy to any number of things. If we look at eggs as one example, though the price of eggs has increased over the last 6 years, the cost of the subsidy hasn't. You could apply this to any other input to an ELP, such as energy costs or wage costs, and you can see that the subsidy has funded a smaller and smaller share of the actual operational costs of that program, and makes it extremely hard to provide quality ECD when the subsidy is frozen at such a low level. And then just briefly on ELP infrastructure, we have a conditional grant. We have a budget of 157 million rand for that. However, we've had consistent under expenditure of around 30 to 40% of that budget over the last few years, and no clear link to the mass registration drive. And so a small increase of only 5 million rand was penciled in for that grant for the next financial year. And on the early nutrition pilot, there have been concerns around the design and the spending of the funds. That pilot was expected to receive a 336 million rand increase, to 336 million in 2025. And so we were looking to see how the February 19 budget responded to that. So what did it provide? So on top of the existing budgets, which I just mentioned, the Minister of Finance, in the budget speech that he never actually gave, announced a 10 billion rand increase in new funding for early learning programs. And this really would represent a doubling of spending on early learning by the government, and is therefore an historic allocation, and really representing a kind of major shift in funding for the first time in early childhood development. This funding would mainly go towards the ECD subsidy, but would very likely also include amounts for the eCares management information system, so that can be fully functional and operational, as well as additional funding for infrastructure and registration support. In terms of the subsidy itself, the proposal was to increase the value of the subsidy to 24 Rand per child per day, which of course will be experienced as an increase, but in effect just restores the value of the subsidy back to its 2019 value of 17 Rand per child a day, when the effect of inflation over the last 6 years is accounted for. So 24 Rand really is kind of the least that the subsidy should be today. If we want to actually really increase quality in the sector, we'll have to keep increasing that further until it can actually cover the costs of a basic quality early learning program. And but obviously the increase from 17 to 24 Rand would be very welcome. And then the remaining funds would fund an expansion of access to early learning programs, subsidized access to 700,000 more children. So this would effectively put the DBE back on track. If this goal was achieved by 2027-28, this would essentially put the DBE back on track to achieving its universal access goals, which we've been talking about for so long, but not making as much progress as we would have liked, mainly because of the lack of budgetary support. And then in addition, there was 210 million Rand added to the ECD infrastructure conditional grant. And for the first time, a very direct and explicit link in that grant was made to the mass registration drive. And so that budget was set to increase not this year, but from 2026-27, the budget would increase to around 260 million Rand per year. And then the nutrition pilot funding, the increase that was penciled in this year to 336 million, that was announced as being kept, which is a good thing. And finally, the child support grant was also proposed to increase by 9.4% to 580 Rand per month. There's a typo there, but it should say 580 Rand, which was one of the largest increases in the child support grant. So altogether, this was a pretty good budget for children and an excellent budget for early learning programs. However, and I'll finish on this slide, the big caveat there is how the budget was to be funded. And we've obviously seen that many parties were not happy to agree to an increase in the VAT rate. That's been largely roundly rejected across the kind of society. And so while it's important that government finds progressive ways to raise revenue in the budget and does not balance the budget through increasing regressive taxes, there is a risk now that the spending commitments which were announced in the February 19 budget could be lost, could be whittled down, because they could be identified as areas for savings if the GNU partners can't agree on how to fund the budget. And so really there's an opportunity now to elevate the importance of ECD in the media, really to engage as many decision makers and power brokers as we can, to remind them that this is an essential allocation to ECD. It hasn't been prioritized in the budget for years, accounting for only 0.2% of the whole budget. That's what we're talking about here. And for the first time, we had a really good allocation to early learning programs, and that shouldn't be negotiated away. Yeah, so I think I'll end there, Seppo and Hops. Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. Much appreciated. If folks have, amazing. If folks have questions, please pop them into the chat and then we'll go back and look through them during the Q&A. Also mindful of time. And Elroy, I see your question, banked. Dan, if we could stop sharing screen so that we can move on to the next presentation. That would be great. Wonderful. Thank you. Great. Daniel, are you ready to come in?
Yes, I am. I just want to make sure that it's sharing from my side.
It is, absolutely.
Fantastic. All right. Hi, everyone. So yeah, I'm also Daniel, Daniel from the Equal Education Law Center. Super glad that so many people have been able to join. So I'm going to try to keep the slide section as short as possible because there's a lot that goes in these sections generally. And so what I've done at the end, you'll see at the end, is I've just put information for people you might be able to get more information from if you'd like to hear more about these. This is intended to be sort of a high-level overview that gives us all the tools to speak confidently about these issues, because one of the things that's really important for us to remember when it comes to budget justice for ECD and funding for ECD is that often the people who are listened to in rooms are people who have access to the kind of language that Treasury often speaks in. And that's very unfair. But one thing we can do about it is, trying to empower ourselves with that language as well. So other Daniel has already explained perfectly the situation for funding of ECD currently in sort of now shelf budget. So I'm going to be focusing, as soon as I learn how to change my slide, there we go, on firstly what was offered in the shelved budget. And I think maybe we need to come up with a catchy term for whatever we call that original budget that was shelved, but for now I'll call it that. So as Daniel has mentioned, the primary revenue raising mechanism specifically for the funding of ECD, for the 10 billion, for the majority of the funding for the ECD, was the VAT increase. I think everyone knows about the VAT increase by now. It was a 2 percentage point increase from 15 to 17%. That was highlighted as the primary form of revenue raising to fund the ECD increase, as well as increases in social grants above inflation and a number of other forms of expenditure. It wasn't, and I think this is the first thing that I want to really highlight here, it certainly wasn't the only revenue raising mechanism even in that budget. There were other revenue raising mechanisms, for example, that I'll go through in a little bit, that were also chosen by Treasury, which are used being used to fund other things. For example, economic development, public infrastructure, things like that, which are all, of course, also important. But it's very important for us to remember, and I think, as I'll explain in a little bit, that the VAT increase is not an all or nothing revenue raising mechanism. There are many other tools at Treasury's disposal, and I think part of our advocacy to ensure we get this ECD increase is to insist on Treasury using them. So that VAT increase came with a number of proposed protection measures from Treasury. So there was the expansion of zero rating. In other words, they would expand the number of goods that are zero rated on VAT. In other words, if you're a consumer, you don't pay VAT on those goods. They were going to increase it to things like tinned meats, more tinned vegetables, milk blends, things like that. There were also going to be above inflation social grant increases that were explicitly framed as being made not because government has recognized the importance of increasing social grants above inflation, which should happen anyway, but as a protection mechanism against that. There was going to be an adjustment of the lower personal income tax brackets for inflation, and then they were not going to increase or add a fuel levy. So why is this considered unacceptable by so many people in society? So people may have heard VAT being described as a regressive tax mechanism. And what that generally means when we refer to regressive versus progressive tax mechanisms is when something is a progressive tax mechanism, it's something which assists with the redistribution or more equitable distribution of wealth and resources. Where it's regressive, it implies that it hurts the poor the hardest. And that is definitely the case with VAT. In fact, VAT is probably seen as the most regressive form of tax. Firstly, because it's a blunt tool, and this is something that Treasury acknowledged in that shelved budget. They used the words themselves to say that even when in the past they've tried to zero rate goods or protect people, it's very hard to calibrate effectively to protect certain people and not protect others. And ultimately, the most important reason why it hurts the poor the most is because VAT is inflationary. And what that means is that even if the price, the VAT-related price is not increasing on zero-rated goods, because VAT is increasing for all other goods, the economy generally then has inflation anyway. And so even those zero-rated goods almost always become more expensive as well after a VAT increase as well. So the zero-rated protection doesn't work very well. And for many of the people who are the poorest of the poor, many of those people weren't currently affording things like dairy blends and tinned meat and tinned vegetables anyway. And so expanding that basket of goods to be zero-rated is not necessarily going to protect them. So the last reason that it's considered unacceptable by many is because it's not actually shown to be very effective at raising revenue. So Treasury considered, in the budget, it had a little weigh up of the different revenue mechanisms. Not many of them. It didn't consider a lot of really important ones. But it said, for example, that they weren't going to increase personal income tax because, and I'm paraphrasing here, in the past when they've tried that, people have just found ways to avoid paying personal income tax, which you can make of that what you will. And they said that it's much harder for people to escape paying VAT. And as shocking as that sentence is, it's also, the problem with that is that one of the ways people escape paying VAT, especially if they're very poor, is just by reducing their expenditure generally and focusing really on the absolute essentials. And what that does is it contracts our economic growth. In fact, Treasury acknowledged that it would probably have an impact on our economic growth. And the last time that Treasury tried to increase VAT by 1 percentage point only, from 14 to 15%, which is now the VAT rate, there was an intended revenue raise of 22.9 billion, and they only managed to raise 0.9 billion of that money. So even if it were the case that it was a really effective form of revenue raising, it would be harmful, but we don't think it's very effective at raising that revenue anyway. So the last thing maybe to chat about here is to understand what a poison pill is in budgeting. So there's a widely held, not everyone believes it, but there's a lot of theories about why VAT was proposed as the increase. Some people believe that it was a poison pill. And what that means is where Treasury or whoever sets a budget essentially creates an ultimatum in a budget to say, okay, we hear you that you want your socioeconomic rights, that you want your rights protected and fulfilled. If you want that, you're going to have to accept this really, really, really difficult trade-off. Otherwise, you don't get those socioeconomic rights increases. Otherwise, you don't get those protections. And this is essentially the kind of language that's already coming out from Treasury since the first shelved budget was rejected, to say, well, you can't have it both ways. You can't have your rights protected and not have a VAT increase. And that is a poison pill. It's, at least according to the theory, right? It's saying that you as civil society have to choose. Either you throw people under the bus or choose which socioeconomic rights get protected and which don't, or you accept this incredibly difficult to accept that increase that will hurt the poor the most. So that becomes really important in terms of understanding what other mechanisms there are to raise revenue. So there are many, and I'm not going to attempt to try and go through all of them in detail here. Obviously, there's personal income tax and corporate income tax. Those are the only two which Treasury sort of considered in the budget, although not to a large degree, especially when it comes to corporate income tax. And as I mentioned, for personal income tax, their only reason really was that people find legal loopholes when you try to increase personal income tax, which for many of us just screams, close the loopholes. But anyway, there are wealth taxes, which people often talk about a wealth tax, but there's actually many different types. There's wealth taxes that you might have on people's estates, on property, for example, for very high value properties, to increase the property tax on those. There are once-off taxes known as special wealth taxes. So those aren't the general concept of the wealth taxes is not on people's income. It's on people who already have a very large amount of wealth. And it's important for me to note here that The last figures we had were that 0.1% of the population owns 25% of the wealth in this country. So generally speaking, when we're talking about wealth taxes, we're not talking about most of us being affected, to say the least. And lastly, there are excise taxes on things like cigarettes, alcohol, sugar, and there's been a lot of criticism for that shelved budget and not adding proper excise taxes on those goods. It's also maybe notable to point out that South Africa is one of the only countries in the world in 2024 where the sale of beer actually increased last year. Almost every other country in the world had a decrease, but more beer was sold. So, do with that information what you will. There's also borrowing, and again, I don't want to go into huge detail, but we should reject this notion that Treasury keeps saying that we're on the edge of a fiscal cliff and we can't borrow possibly anymore. South Africa is currently ranked 47th in the world in terms of our debt to GDP ratio. Countries that have higher debt to GDP ratios than us include Belgium, the UK, Singapore, obviously the US, Japan, and many other countries which are much wealthier than we are. And the country with the lowest debt to GDP ratio in the world at the moment is Eswatini. So I think it's important that we reject this narrative that there's no possible way we could borrow anymore. We're currently at about 74, 75. Then there's also the sale of assets and the drawdown of contingency reserves, and that's something that the government is actually already doing, was planning to do in that shelved budget. So the biggest reserve the government has is the gold and foreign exchange contingency reserve. It's worth hundreds of billions of rand, and they have drawn down on that funding. But in the past, and what they were planning on doing in the budget, is only drawing down on that funding to use it for things like, for example, infrastructure development, economic development, which again are very important, but it does beg the question why they're not willing to use that money for children. And then, of course, there's improved revenue collection. And as people will have seen in the news, there is a bit of an argument behind the scenes, sort of, between SARS and Treasury, where the SARS Commission has said that around 800 billion rand in uncollected taxes could be collected if we improved our revenue collection. And then lastly, there's also the discussions about reprioritization. And I think from our side, it's really important that we remember that all of our rights are interconnected, which I'll get to in a second. And so there are things that could probably be reprioritized in terms of wasteful government expenditure. And I think many of us will have immediate ideas for that. But I think it's really important that as people who are connected and struggles that are connected, we don't try justify cutting one form of social expenditure to save another, or robbing Peter to pay Paul, as some people say. And then finally, on the duties to fund. This is really important because in rejecting this narrative that we have to choose between VAT or choose between protecting children's rights, we have to remind the government that they have a duty to protect children, and part of that requires a duty to fund those protections. So firstly, under socioeconomic rights, there's an international legal principle called non-retrogression, and basically that means that even if the government doesn't improve the standards of people's rights, it's not allowed to legally decrease those standards unless there are very exceptional circumstances. And an example of this is the subsidy, which, having been frozen at its value, is actually in real terms decreasing. That's an example of retrogression. And so there's an actual legal duty on the government to improve the value, at least to restore it to what it was originally. There are the best interests of the child, which require that in every matter concerning the child, this is section 28.2 of the Constitution, that those childs are of paramount concern. There's intersectionality of rights, which in other words means that the government has a duty to make sure that it doesn't harm one right by harming other rights as well. And finally, for certain components of ECD, like early learning, there's the component of immediate realizability. So for basic education, for example, it's not an excuse for government to say that they're hoping to do it in time. In terms of the department's duties, there's duties to cooperate amongst departments. And so some of the language you've seen from departments saying, we need to remove funding from one department to give to another one, especially when it comes to people's rights and the rights of the most vulnerable, is not lawful. In fact, what they have a duty to do is give proper proposals to Treasury that are costed and justified, that allow Treasury to give the funding properly. But also, Treasury has a duty, firstly, to consult the public properly. And, when we look at what consultation currently looks like, I think many of us would agree that there's very little meaningful public consultation with Treasury for the budget process. The budget tips is the only real process that happens, and that doesn't actually go to Treasury, it goes to their communications department. It doesn't inform the budgeting process directly. And we've often heard very dismissive statements from the Minister of Finance about how, public consultation, extensive public consultation would just never work. Not that they've ever actually tried it. And of course, they also have the duty to fund legislative obligations. And so an example here is when Bella made grade R compulsory, which it currently is, there was a duty on Treasury's part to provide the 17 billion rand of funding, which was required for grade R to be made compulsory. They haven't done that, and so they're currently violating their legal duties. So all in all, that's to say that we need to reject this narrative that it's either tax or nothing. We certainly need to reject the narrative that we have to fight amongst sectors for our rights, and we need to reject the narrative that there's no other way for us to protect the rights of children. Where you can get more information on the budget process, you can get from the BJC, from Imali Yetu, on its alternative revenue proposals, from the AIDC, from the Institute for Economic Justice. And just two examples of where you can get information on legal duties to fund ECD from myself at the Law Centre. The Legal Resources Centre has brilliant resources on that as well. And of course, Real Reform is here for overall connection and referral to other information. So sorry I went a little bit over, but tried to keep it as brief as possible and very happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Absolutely not too much. Fascinating, interesting. And I think echoing so much of what people are thinking and feeling, the sentiment at the moment. Everybody's compromised, but poor and working class households even more so when we think about an increase in that, but also advocating against the pitting rights against each other isn't the way to go. And I'm so glad that we're surfacing that as well. Again, I'm going to ask folks, we're having really cool chats here by the chats. I'm going to ask people to plug their questions in there, their comments in there. And when we have an open discussion, we can get to those. But I'm going to hand over to Tepo now to talk us through advocacy strategies that we can pull together off collectively as we head to the 12th of March. Thank you, Keda. Over to you. Do you need me to present?
Will you be sharing my screen?
Sure.
Yes, please.
Cool.
Thank you, Daniel and Dan, for giving us the really important information that you have. And I think just to sort of capture it and summarize it for us, Daniel showed us that what has been changed in the budget is really significant. I'd even call it revolutionary in terms of us seeing the biggest budget we have seen in ECD's history. Really speaks a lot to getting us to where we need to be, which is guiding us towards the universal access that the DBE themselves have had planned. Colleagues in the room, I really want to inspire you to search for the 2030 ECD strategy. This is a document that was put together by the Department of Basic Education that outlines the roadmap towards getting us to universal access. And like Daniel said in the first presentation, is that until this budget, we have already fallen behind the timeline that gets us to that universal access. But this proposed budget would have put us back in track towards achieving that. So that's what we want to do, is advocate that budget that we saw on the 19th that was never delivered stays at the very least as is, so that when we hear it on the 12th, we still see the same amount of support that was given there. So how do we want to do this? Oh, and then Dan showed us that we don't have to be sort of held by the throat that we have to accept the VAT at 17%, but there are other ways that money can be generated by the government. And also we don't have to pin socioeconomic rights against each other. So we're really, all that to say, we're really justified in this course that we're taking of advocating that the budget remains and finding other progressive ways of getting the subsidy or getting the money that the government needs. So in my part of the presentation, I really want to get us involved. As people on this call, we currently have 101 people on this call right now. And I want to really plead with each and every one of you on this call to take it upon yourself to be active in this advocacy call. We have until the 12th of March to make as big, as loud a noise as possible in all areas so that the key people can listen and hear our cry. So here I'm going to speak about all the ways that we can get involved in advocacy. Real Reform is really about creating active participants in advocacy. So everyone on this call, you have your part to play. Next slide, Hopala.
Sorry, Temple, I'm trying to get it moving. There we go.
So really our objective here is around ensuring that we get the budget that we heard proposed on the 19th of Feb to stay intact and remain as it is. So we want to do this through a few different ways. We're going to do political engagements, and these are direct communications that we're going to be addressing to NGO members and GNU members rather. These are the group of people that are going to be renegotiating what the final budget looks like. So we have an array of activities that we're going to do around sending letters to key people within the GNU, within Treasury, the Minister of Basic Education herself, so that we can show the case that we are making for maintaining the budget as it is. We also have an aspect of a media element where we have released a press statement and are currently doing television and radio interviews, trying to get our word out there that this change is really going to be fundamental, not just to ECD, but to really the future of the country. And then where you come in, colleagues, is here where we want to maintain public pressure. And this is around using platforms like social media, community meetings, or any other space where we are able to advocate for young children. Secondly, we're going to hold MPs, the Minister and Treasury accountable to their promises. So trying to make a case for keeping that budget as it is. And then lastly, mobilizing for public support. We can go to the next slide, Hopes. The case that we want to make here is really to show that ECD is a non-negotiable and young children themselves are non-negotiable. So up till this point, as Real Reform, these are the activities that we have done around making a noise, really advocating and ensuring that these cries are out there. We've published a press statement. Zoe will help us by sharing a few of these links in our chats. So you can go to the comment section to access these documents, particularly the press statement. This outlines mostly what Daniel was speaking about in the first presentation, also briefly what Dan speaks about in the second presentation, what the changes are in the budget and the call for VAT money to be raised in alternative ways. And this statement has been shared broadly and widely, and all the media engagements have been based on this. Secondly, going into that have been media interviews. We're trying to get onto television, onto radio. So colleagues, if people on this platform have connections to television programs and radio programs, please let us know and try to get us on there. We want to really ensure that every corner of the Republic hears that we have this sort of big change that is that could be coming our way. We also have op-eds and articles that colleagues are going to be writing. As you may know, Real Reform, we're made up of 12 organizations on the steering committee, and we have a few of these partners working on op-eds that we're going to be making public. And then we also have letters that we have written directed at the members of the GNU. So like I said, the members of the GNU are the people who will be renegotiating. So you want them to bring their attention to the points that we're making. We'll be writing letters to the National Treasury. And also we have penned a letter directed at the Minister of Basic Education. Some of you may know that we had a sit-in at the DBE office last year. And in one of the demands that we had was to increase the subsidy and increase funding for ECD. The minister had gotten back to us and said that we would see an increase in this budget. So we're following up by sending more letters to her to ensure that she keeps her promise. And then lastly, we'll be writing an open letter. This will be penned by directors who form part of the organizations that form the steering committee, hopefully leveraging the sort of stronger, more gravitas voices of people in the ECD sector, so that we can ensure that we are taken seriously about what we're talking about. In the next slide, I will be speaking on how you can now get involved. So this is really where you point to yourself to say, what can I do? And I want to reaffirm that your voice truly matters. This has been something we have seen time and time again in Real Reform for ECD's advocacy work. It roots back to our founding campaign in the Children's Amendment Bill, where we were able to get over 1,600 submissions to reject the Children's Amendment Bill. And we saw what happens when people on the ground are the ones who are engaging and mobilizing. So we want to really get that same energy again this time around. We're going to be using social media. So those who have a Twitter account and are logged into their Twitter account right now, could you please make a tweet and tag the Minister of Basic Education? I have put her tags on there. And Zoe is online, so could you please also go to the chat where Zoe will have posted a link, and the link that you'll be seeing on the chat, she has just posted it. The link that you'll be seeing in the chat is an already pre-generated tweet, so you don't have to do a lot of thinking. You don't have to do creative writing here. We've done a pre-generated tweet that you can see, and it outlines the sort of gist of what our campaign is calling for. You can use that tweet, follow that link right now. I'd love for you to do it right now, so that she's currently sitting in the Lukhotla. I'm at the same event. So I'd love for her to get all of these tweets right now in real time. If you also are so inspired, you can write your own message, personalize it, and speaking about what are some of the challenges that you are facing due specifically to underfunding. I know she's a very active person on social media, so I'm sure that she will be getting these tweets. So please engage on social media. You can also use Facebook and Instagram, where you can share our calls on there. Next slide, please. Can I also just get a thumbs up if you have been able to access the link? Maybe that can also indicate to us if you are doing it. Give us a thumbs up that you have been able to access the tweet and have posted it.
I'm already seeing some people tweet on X, so thanks, guys.
Thank you. We need as many as possible. I'd even say, let's do it now, wait 10 minutes and do it again, wait 10 minutes and do it again. Really, so that she can see that we are on the ground. Real ECD practitioners, the ECD community ought to be an active community. And the more she sees that, the more we can sort of get her ear and ensure that she listens to us. So please tweet as often and as much as possible. And we do encourage the other social media platforms too. The second action that you can take, and this is also one that we anticipate can be really, really powerful. We would like particularly practitioners, but also parents are welcome to do so, to record a video, not more than a minute long. You can go a minute and a half if you have a big story to share, but no pressure, just a minute long, sharing your experiences around what low funding has done to your center, or the challenges you face at your center because of low funding. Again, this is something that we want to compile, put together, and share with the Minister and the Minister of Finance also directly. So you can post these also online. This might take time, so I would encourage you, as soon as the call ends, you record your video and you post it online. You can also send it directly to us. There's a number put on the slide. And you can send your video to that number too, where we can share it on our own platforms directly. What we would really encourage you to do is that when you do share it on your own platform, is to tag ECD, Real Reform for ECD, so that we see it and we are able to share it. But we really want to encourage as many practitioners as possible. Right now we have 99, 100 people on this call. If all of you could really record a video for us, sharing your experiences so that they can hear from us, hear your own voice around these challenges that we face with ECD subsidies. We can go to the next slide. I do want to have enough time for questions and answers, so I want us to finish these presentations relatively soon. And then thirdly, we will be sharing infographics. So Zoe, our comms person, our head of comms, has created these really powerful infographics that we are going to be sharing. And we would love for you to use this on your WhatsApps, on your Facebook as your cover photo, as your profile picture, and also sharing them online, because they will sort of capture what we are saying into an infographic. You know, sometimes when you see it in an image, it becomes so much easier to digest. So once these are shared with you, we also encourage colleagues to share these broadly, share these on your WhatsApp groups, on your ECD forum groups, and really encourage your community to get involved in this advocacy work. Should we see the same amount in the final budget, this would really put us on track to that universal access and really change what we have been seeing in early childhood development for so long. So I really think the case speaks for itself. And if you are really resonating with that, take this message forward, and sharing these infographics is one way of doing that. Next. And then lastly, we have a challenge, another one. I think, yeah, we have sort of layered these so that no stone is left unturned. And this is one that we want to do also in the lead up to the 12th. So every day we would like to see someone post around this in the lead up to the 12th. And we're calling it the 17 Rand Challenge, because as Daniel showed in the presentation that he shared, that what cost 17 Rand 5 years ago does not cost 17 Rand today. So it's close to impossible to expect any sort of meaningful, holistic, quality or inclusive ECD services to be given on 17 Rand per child per day. So we want to make this reality. We want to present this reality in a way that people can really see and resonate with, by creating the 17 Rand Challenge. So what you would do to participate in this challenge is that the next time you're buying any child or child-related item like food, nappies, books, toys, learning materials, or school supplies, anything related to your child that you will be buying, we would like for you to take a picture of the receipt and then post that online and show that 17 Rand cannot even buy that. Because we know whatever food you buy, it will definitely go over 17 Rand. Nappies definitely go over 17 Rand. So we will then have to add a caption there that says that 17 Rand can't even buy this. How can it feed, educate, and care for a child? So that would be the wording that you would use. Another social media campaign where we want to specifically tag the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Education, and other MPs, so that they can see the reality of how much things are costing and how much they are giving the sector in expectation of holistic early childhood development services. So I'm encouraging you to participate in this advocacy call, and also encourage other people. And I think the more people do it and sharing it in your WhatsApp groups, in your ECD forum groups, the more we can get people to do it. So just to run over it again, it's just about the next time you buy a child related item, taking a picture of that slip and then showing that 17 Rand can't even buy this. How can it provide for holistic development? I have a few examples on the next slide that can just showcase how this would work. So the first example is if you were to buy a loaf of bread and milk, and this costs, let's say for instance, 30 Rand, but it'd probably be way more than that. You'll say this cost X amount, almost double or triple the subsidy. And then you can write how is 17 Rand supposed to cover a full day's nutrition? Or secondly, if you were to buy nappies, you would say 17 Rand can't even buy 1 day's worth of nappies. How can it provide for quality early childhood development? If you were to buy books or crayons, you say quality education starts with books and material, but 17 Rand wouldn't even buy a coloring book. And then lastly, another example is if you were to buy learning materials like puzzles, blocks, or flashcards, you can also put that. So this is just to show a range of things that you would be generally buying for young children, and then indicating that this doesn't match what is expected of us for 17 Rand per child per day. Thank you very much, colleagues. Now this is in the final slide. Before we get to the Q&A, you are welcome to join the movement in order to keep updated. In the next few days until the 12th of March, we will be updating around the progress that we're making in the campaign, sharing all the other things that people have been sharing online. So you are welcome to go to, Zoe, could you please again share a link in the chat around, oh, I have it, I can do it, Zoe. I have just shared a link in the chat that will take you to the sign up form. And then this is where you will sign up to join the movement if you're not already part of the movement. But if you've been getting emails from us, then it would mean that you are already part of the movement and you're being updated. So final calls to action, please spread the word. The aim is to ensure that every corner of the internet, every corner of social media gets to hear that we are on the edge really of getting early childhood universal access to early childhood development, and meaningful budgeting will get us there. And then doing all the actions that we have discussed in here. If you tweeted, just tweet again right now so that the minister can get those. You can tag us on both Twitter and Facebook. And then also I've added information for email, where you can email us at rr4ecd@equalitycollective.org.za, or visit our website there also. That is my time. So I will then stop there and give it back to Hopelang for Q&A.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Tsepo. So if we could potentially also share the WhatsApp number in the chat for the videos if we haven't done so already. There are a few questions here that have been responded to by Daniel and Dan. But I just wanted to say thank you to our three presenters. We've had a really good, succinct presentation from Daniel at ILIFA on what the shelved budget would have meant for ECD in real terms and with provision of the figures. A presentation from Dan from ELC on progressive revenue measures that could be explored versus the implications of a VAT increase, and Tsepo talking to us about advocacy tools and tactics that we'd like to use over the next few days. I think it's just a week and a bit now. Yeah, almost 2 weeks, yeah. Until the budget sits, and I think we can together we can definitely ensure that the sector gets the funding that it needs and deserves. Could I please get hands for any questions and or comments? Let me see if I can see any hands. I see you, Carol.
Hi, Hopelang, thank you very much. This is just a quick comment, just to say I think the team has done such incredible work in this short period of time. And you're really elevating the voice of those who are not able to speak for themselves and don't have such platforms as such social media, and not accessible or having access to the closer power. So really, this is commendable and it's really needed. And yeah, aluta continua.
Thanks so much, Carol. Appreciate the encouragement very much. Do we have any questions related to what was shared in the first presentation, the second presentation, or any proposals in relation to advocacy tactics that we could explore in the coming days? Zoe?
Hey, Hope, thank you so much. I hope you can hear me.
Yeah.
Awesome. I just wanted to ask either one, Daniel or the other Daniel, to respond to the question that I posted in the chat, which was regards to, what is the timeline, the absolute kind of last deadline for government to finalize and pass a budget? That's the first question. And the reason why I'm asking is because realistically, how long does the sort of alternative proposal of revenue generation take? So is there a quick fix to the solution, and should that, so essentially, because I feel like that should be informing our advocacy efforts, right? Like, what is the proposal? If the proposal we're making is something that's going to take 3 years, then, it doesn't make sense. So I'm just kind of wondering, is there something that we can propose that's an immediately implementable solution for government, or does that even exist? Thanks.
Thanks, Zoe. Daniel, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, sorry. I was just typing very slowly with my little frozen fingers. But I was gonna, but yeah, I'm happy to answer it out loud. So basically, in short, the answer is that this is governed by the Public Finance Management Act, so the PFMA. I'll put it in the chat as well in case anyone would like to see. And Section 26 of that act says that the budget must be passed by Parliament before the start of the financial year, unless in exceptional circumstances, in which case it needs to be passed. It just says as soon as possible after the start of the financial year. And that's why you saw Usimayamane, when they had the whole thing in Parliament, saying they needed to narrow down a date. So in theory, it needs to be passed by then. But it also says that if the budget isn't passed by the start of the financial year, then there's a provision in the PFMA which allows for you to use in the first 4 months of the next financial year up to 45% of what was allocated in the previous year's budget. So in other words, if we don't pass it in time, we'll be able to use for the first 4 months of the year what was allocated in the 2024 budget. But as we all know, that 2024 budget has pretty much nothing for ECD and for socioeconomic rights generally. So it wouldn't be ideal. And also, once you then do pass a budget, you would have to deduct whatever you've spent from the last budget from your ongoing budget, which would mean that there would probably be budget cuts as well. To your second question about what can be done most immediately. So I think the IEJ and AIDC are the best place to answer this, but in short, each of the different proposals has like a different level of immediate implementation. Some of the quickest ones would be the excise tax and the drawdown on the gold and foreign exchange contingency reserve. Both of those, especially together, but arguably even the exchange reserve would have enough funding, more than enough funding, to immediately make 10 billion rand available. And so I think maybe that's one thing to consider, that there are definite things, and actually the revenue that you would raise from that wouldn't be immediate, because you would have to collect it over the period of the year and then use it for the next year after that. So yeah, I think they'll have better proposals than I can illustrate now, but I would say the fastest ones would be that, or potentially increased borrowing as well.
Amazing.
I hope that's helpful.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Dan. I see you, Portia, and with my sharing rights, I also have a question/thought for Daniel McLaren. Come through, Portia. You're on mute in case you are talking. Okay. Pop in when you're ready, Portia. I wanted to ask Daniel both, I guess. Portia? Okay. I wanted to ask about how we advocate or influence the budget before moments in time
Hello.
Moments, because hi, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you guys.
Your hand is up, and I'll come after you. Please go ahead.
Yes, I would like to take this opportunity to thank you guys for the campaign that you are doing for us about that 17 rand per child. I'm also a principal for more than 12 years. I'm at KZN Pongola. My school name is Nentlanda Daycare and Preschool Center. That 17 rand is not really working, guys, for us. As for instance, for us here, they say it's 17 rand per child per day. Then when you go to when the schools are off, that 17 rand you don't get. They say you get paid with the days that you went to school with. Then after that, that 17 rand that they are talking about, we don't get it like every month. Like even now, for instance, we last received funding on the September, October, November, December, January, February, we didn't get any funding. I was like asking if it's possible for you guys to add that to into the campaign that you're busy doing, because this is not us only here at Pongola under Zululand, also to another district here at KZN, and we're suffering for that, from that situation. Even though you can calculate that 17 rand per child per day, but you end up not getting it. Maybe a year you will be subsidized for like 4 months. Then the new budget starting again, you will also receive funding maybe for 4 months into like maybe you get it on April, then you'll get it on September for 2 months, then October for 1 month, December 3 months, then it's finished. You have to wait again. You don't get that 17 rand, even though you are planning with that 17 rand. We are like struggling a lot.
Thanks so much, Portia, for that input. And beyond just the sum and what it cannot do, is exactly what you're saying around the consistent payment of that amount, which is not much to begin with. So I can't even imagine the challenges that programs face because of that. I wanted to pose to Zoe. Tepo, I see you. I see your hand. I wanted to pose to Zoe a question about whether our messaging in this moment in time can also include the consistent payment of subsidies, because that is critical. Otherwise, programs aren't able to function at all or at their optimum, optimal. So there's that element. And the other one that I wanted to add there for you, Portia, especially because you're based in KZN, is that one of the organizations that sit on real reform is the Legal Resources Center. And they are currently helping a number of ECD programs. And Tepo probably knows more because it's under a collective at the moment. But essentially, we're going to court, or the LRC is going to court, representing a number of programs within KZN around this exact same issue, the non-payment of subsidies. And I'm wondering if we can't put you in touch. I think papers are still being drafted, but Tepo, perhaps you can come through and you might have a more recent information on how we're moving there. And then I'll move to Daniel after Tepo.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Hops. Thanks, Portia, for bringing that up. I was going to bring up that, yes, one of our steer co-partners, which is the Legal Resources Center, has taken up a litigation case. So taking the Department of Education in KZN, challenging them in court around paying the subsidies on time. So that is an ongoing avenue that we are exploring, particularly in KZN. So I will update you on that, Portia, as we go along and see how you can come onto that. I will be engaging with our partner in Upongola, Lulo Mapiko. So we will get more information from you around what is happening in Pongola with regards to subsidy, and then pass that along to the Legal Resources Center. So yeah, thank you very much, Portia, for bringing that up.
Thanks so much, Tebo. Portia will be in touch. Daniel?
Thanks, Hopoleng. Yeah, so I just wanted to respond to a couple of the questions that came through as your question, which I think actually builds on other questions about, public participation opportunities now and how to influence the budget. And yeah, I think, and just one thing to add on, passing the budget itself is there is a risk that public participation opportunities might be restricted if politicians feel under pressure to pass the budget. And I think that would be something that would be very important to resist the temptation on their part for many reasons, not least that Parliament ultimately is responsible for passing the budget. It gets proposed by the Minister of Finance, but Parliament actually passes the law. The budget is a piece of legislation that must be passed in Parliament, and people are entitled to have their say on all laws affecting them, including the budget. So I think it's very important that those processes take place in Parliament and are not kind of circumvented because of the delay. And just to say that some information on options to raise revenue outside of VAT have been shared in the chat, and it's wrong for Treasury to say that VAT is the easiest way to raise revenue. I mean, you only have to change a tax bracket for personal income tax to raise revenue. That's another way of raising revenue immediately. So there are options in the budget, and Treasury, and the Minister of Finance opted for VAT, but I think it's important to engage with the other options. And just to talk a little bit more then about the opportunities in Parliament. So, I think it was Tabasile mentioned the question of budget tips, and they're only viewed by the media. Yes, that is a very small part of the public participation process, Tabasile. It's worth contributing to, if there was a flood of ECD inputs on budget tips, that would be shared with the Minister of Finance, and that would, I think, help to show officials and people within the Treasury that there's a lot of support for ECD. But the main mechanism to get involved in the budget process is through the parliamentary public hearings on the budget bills. And we will be participating in those as Real Reform. Those will be held 2 to 3 weeks after the budget is tabled in Parliament. And what those give us an opportunity to do is actually engage with the National Treasury officials directly, as well as the politicians from the different political parties, both in the GNU and the opposition parties, because they have to scrutinize and oversee and then ultimately pass the budget which has been put forward by the Minister of Finance. So it's a chance to put our recommendations out there, to figure out what our recommendations are. And I'd like to say that if you would like to participate in that process, please get in touch with us, whether it's by joining us in the submission we are putting together as Real Reform, or even contributing your own submission. And if you would like support for doing that, there is support available. And even presenting to Parliament and being involved in the public hearing itself, it's really important that people affected by these decisions that are being taken are kind of represented in those processes. And we would love to support your participation. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Dan. I just wanted to say, as you're talking now, I was thinking about how mass mobilization can turn the tides, if there's even a thought of retracting that money that was allocated for the sector. I think the numbers, the safety numbers, the focus on ECD, the concerted effort that we need to put in could potentially turn the tide. And I think this sector is getting the attention that it so much deserves and needs. And the journey ahead is long, beyond just this moment in time related to the budget, which is significant. The journey is long. The issues that Portia has raised around the non-payment of subsidies, or even being consistently, paid for a crucial service that she and others provide. And the realization of the DBE's ECD 2030 strategy needs a push from our side as well. I really think there's a lot of work that we need to do to change the public's minds beyond government officials, but to get the layperson, to get parents interested in this sector and to show them that this stage in a child's life matters. To get teachers in schools to see that this stage in a child's mind matters. So a lot of persuasion lies ahead of us as well. I am not seeing any more hands. I'm going to take a beat to see if there are any burning questions or comments before I get us to a close. I think that was the length of a beat. Tepo, firstly, just wanted to say that we will be sharing the presentation. Somebody had asked earlier in the chat about whether the presentations will be shared. Zoe, I think, if I'm correct, will be doing that for us. Yes, Kada? Yebo? Okay, good. So we'll have access to those. But to encourage you all, please, to get involved in the tactics that Tepo spoke to. Please do take part in the 17 Rand challenge. Please do tweet at the minister. Reach out to her on Instagram and other social media platforms. Please do contribute your videos to us on WhatsApp so that we can share those on our social media platforms as well. Please don't forget to tag Real Reform for ECD. Let's make sure that what we saw in that shelved budget doesn't change. Zoe is saying that we must use the last 2 minutes to share. And there's a link there that she's posted. I'm gonna look at Portia's question now. Tepo, please come through.
Thanks, Hopes. I just wanted to remind people that we're not just limiting to our social media. Just wanted to remind that we're also sending letters directly to the minister. We've sent letters to the GNU members. So rest assured that if you are unable to send a tweet or a Facebook message, we have also done it on the back end so that there's direct communication. And we want to encourage you to also, if you're so inspired, to send a letter to the minister, send a letter to MPs so that they can also get them through those sort of formal channels of communication. And we're happy to support you if you need any support in that front. Thanks, Hopes.
Thanks so much, Tepo. All right, everybody, letting you off 5 minutes early. Thank you so much for coming through. We appreciate it. We appreciate you. Let's hit the streets. Let's hit the media streets, the social media streets, the advocacy streets, the activism streets. Have a good one, and thank you.
Thank you, Hopeleng. Bye.
Bye. Zuko?
Bye.
Hi. Sorry, I just saw your hand. Yes? Hello?
Maybe it was like a waving goodbye hand.